Your tomato plants can look perfectly healthy for weeks. Green leaves, fast growth, new flowers, maybe even a few tiny tomatoes, and then everything starts going wrong. The bottom leaves turn yellow, flowers drop without making fruit, tomatoes split open before you can pick them, dark spots appear, fruit develops ugly patches on the bottom, or you end up with a 6-foot-tall plant that somehow produces almost nothing. It feels sudden, but usually it isn't. Most tomato problems begin much earlier with small mistakes repeated day after day. The good news is that if you catch these mistakes early enough, many of them can still be corrected. So before your tomato harvest gets ruined, check whether you're making any of these 9 common mistakes. Mistake number 1, watering randomly. Imagine leaving your tomato plant bone dry for several days. The leaves start drooping. The soil pulls away from the edge of the container. So you panic and completely soak it. Then it dries out again. Then you soak it again. That wet-dry roller coaster is exactly what you want to avoid. Tomatoes perform best when moisture around their roots stays reasonably consistent. If the soil becomes extremely dry and then suddenly receives a large amount of water, rapidly expanding fruit can be more likely to crack. Irregular moisture is also strongly associated with blossom end rot. That's the dark, leathery patch you sometimes see developing on the bottom of a tomato. Blossom end rot involves calcium not reaching developing fruit properly, and inconsistent soil moisture can interfere with that process even when calcium is present in the soil. The opposite mistake is watering a tiny amount every day. If you're only wetting the top inch of soil, you may encourage a shallow root system instead of getting moisture deeper into the root zone. The better approach is to water thoroughly and then monitor the soil instead of watering according to habit. Stick your finger into the soil. If the upper layer is drying out, check whether moisture is still available farther down. Containers need especially close attention because they can dry dramatically faster than garden beds during hot weather. Water near the base of the plant, preferably earlier in the day, and add mulch to slow moisture loss. Your goal isn't permanently soggy soil, it's consistent moisture without constantly swinging between drought and saturation. And once you fix the water, take a look at what you're feeding the plant. Mistake number 2, using too much nitrogen. This mistake can actually make your tomatoes look healthier at first. Your plant becomes huge. The leaves are dark green. The stems grow rapidly. You proudly look at this monster tomato plant and think you're about to harvest enough tomatoes for the entire neighborhood. Except there's one problem. Where are the tomatoes? Nitrogen is essential for plant growth, especially leafy growth, but more fertilizer does not automatically mean more fruit. When tomatoes receive excessive nitrogen, you can encourage vigorous vegetative growth at the expense of the balance you want during flowering and fruit production. Beginners sometimes create this problem by repeatedly applying high nitrogen fertilizers because the immediate result looks impressive. Instead, start with healthy soil and compost. Then use an appropriate tomato or balanced fertilizer according to the product directions and your plant's needs. Once flowering begins, don't keep dumping extra nitrogen onto the plant just because you want it to grow faster. Remember what you're actually trying to grow, not the biggest leaves, but tomatoes. And those tomatoes need room. Mistake number 3, planting tomatoes too close together. This happens all the time in raised beds and small gardens. You have 6 tomato seedlings and enough room for maybe 3, but throwing away healthy seedlings feels terrible, so you squeeze all 6 into the bed. For the first few weeks, it looks fine. Then the plants explode with growth and turn into one giant wall of foliage. Crowding creates several problems. Leaves block sunlight from reaching other parts of the plants. Air movement decreases. Moisture stays on foliage longer after rain or watering. And warm, damp, crowded foliage can create favorable conditions for several tomato diseases. Leaf spots and other fungal problems become much harder to manage once you're dealing with a dense jungle. Spacing varies depending on whether you're growing compact, determinate tomatoes, sprawling, indeterminate varieties, or plants trained vertically. So check the recommendation for your specific variety and growing method. But the important principle is simple. Don't treat spacing recommendations as wasted garden space. That empty space is providing light and airflow. If your tomatoes are already crowded, light pruning may help improve airflow, but don't suddenly remove half the plant. And next season, resist the temptation to fit one more tomato into every available gap. One healthy plant with room to grow can be far more productive than several stressed plants fighting for the same space. Mistake number 4, waiting too long to support your tomatoes. A young tomato transplant doesn't look like it needs much help. It's small, upright, and perfectly capable of supporting itself. Then, a few weeks pass. The plant doubles in size. Branches spread everywhere. everywhere. Fruit begins adding weight. And suddenly you're trying to force a cage around a plant that has already taken over the garden. That's when stems snap, branches get bent, fruit ends up resting against the soil, and pushing stakes into the ground beside an established plant can potentially damage roots. Support your tomatoes while they're young. Depending on your growing setup, that might mean a cage, stake, trellis, or vertical string system. The exact system matters less than getting it in place early and making sure it's sturdy enough for a mature plant loaded with fruit. As the tomato grows, gently guide or secure stems where needed. Don't wait until the plant collapses during the first summer storm. But supporting the plant physically is only part of managing all that growth. Mistake number 5, pruning the wrong way. Tomato pruning advice can become confusing very quickly. One gardener tells you to remove every sucker. Another gardener tells you never to prune anything. The better answer depends partly on what type of tomato you're growing and how you're training it. But for beginners, there is one important rule. Don't turn pruning into a competition to see how few leaves you can leave on the plant. Healthy foliage is useful. Leaves capture sunlight and help power the plant. If you remove excessive healthy foliage, you can stress the tomato and expose previously shaded fruit to intense sunlight, increasing the risk of sun scald. But never pruning a vigorous tomato can create the opposite problem. You may end up with tangled, overcrowded growth that restricts airflow and makes it difficult to inspect the plant. A sensible middle ground is usually better. Remove leaves that are diseased, badly damaged, or touching the soil. Thin, selected, crowded growth when necessary for airflow. If you're training an indeterminate tomato vertically, you may choose to remove some suckers to keep the plant manageable. But don't strip away healthy leaves simply because you saw someone aggressively pruning tomatoes online. Mistake number 6, ignoring the lower leaves. If you only look at the top of your tomato plant, you can miss some of the earliest warning signs. Lower leaves live in a rough neighborhood. They're close to the soil. They receive less airflow. They can be splashed with water and soil during rain or irrigation. And as the plant becomes larger, those leaves can stay shaded and humid. That's why you should inspect them regularly. Look for yellowing, brown or dark spots, chewed areas, tiny holes, unusual curling, and leaves that are resting directly against the ground. One yellow leaf doesn't automatically mean disaster. Older lower leaves can naturally decline. What matters is whether the problem is spreading or showing a pattern. If lower leaves are badly damaged or clearly diseased, removing them can help reduce problem foliage around the base of the plant. Use clean tools or clean hands and don't remove huge amounts of foliage at once. Then look at what's underneath those leaves, because if you're staring at bare dirt, you're missing one of the easiest upgrades you can make. Mistake number 7, leaving the soil bare. Mulch isn't just there to make your garden look tidy, it's functional. Bare soil can heat up quickly under intense summer sun. It also loses moisture faster. That means your tomato roots may experience bigger swings between wet and dry conditions. And remember mistake number 1, consistency matters. There's another benefit. When rain or water hits bare soil, droplets can splash soil onto the lower foliage. That can help move soil-associated pathogens onto the plant. A layer of mulch acts like a protective barrier. It slows evaporation, reduces soil splashing, and helps moderate conditions around the root zone. You can use materials such as clean straw, shredded leaves, finished compost, untreated grass clippings, or another suitable organic mulch. If you're using grass clippings, make sure they haven't been treated with herbicides or other lawn chemicals you don't want around your vegetables. Apply mulch around the root zone, but don't pile thick, wet material tightly against the main stem. This one simple habit can make watering easier and keep the base of your tomato plants cleaner. But even with good soil protection, your tomatoes still need nutrition, and their needs don't stay exactly the same forever. Mistake number 8, feeding tomatoes the same way all season. A young tomato seedling and a mature plant carrying 20 tomatoes are doing very different jobs, yet many gardeners feed them exactly the same way. Sometimes they fertilize on autopilot. Every Saturday, more fertilizer. The plant could be dark green and growing aggressively, but it still gets another dose because that's what the schedule says. Instead, watch the plant. Early in the season, your tomato is establishing roots and building enough healthy vegetative growth to support future production. Later, flowering and fruit development become major priorities. Your feeding approach should support the plant without constantly pushing excessive leafy growth. If you're using commercial fertilizer, follow the label rates. More is not better. Over-fertilizing can stress plants, create nutrient imbalances, and even damage roots. Look for clues. A huge amount of leafy growth with disappointing flowering can suggest suggest that your feeding strategy needs attention. Pale growth may point toward a nutrition issue, although yellowing can have many causes. Weak growth or poor fruit development also deserves investigation. The key is not to diagnose every leaf by color alone. Consider your soil, watering, fertilizer history, weather, and the rest of the plant together. Feed deliberately, not automatically. And finally, even if you get everything else right, there's one mistake that can turn a small problem into a destroyed plant. Mistake number 9, ignoring early pests and disease signs. A tomato hornworm is much easier to deal with when there's one caterpillar. It's a different situation after you've ignored missing leaves for a week. The same principle applies to many tomato problems. Check your plants every few days. Don't just admire the tomatoes. Look underneath the leaves. Check new growth, inspect the stems, look at the lower foliage. Watch for aphids, whiteflies, spider mites, caterpillars, hornworms, unusual spots, spreading yellowing, curling, and damaged leaves. Early detection gives you options. A caterpillar may simply be removed by hand. Small pest populations may be manageable with appropriate gentle controls. A suspicious diseased leaf may be removed before the problem becomes widespread. Improving airflow and keeping foliage dry can also reduce conditions that favor some diseases. And when watering, aim for the soil rather than routinely soaking the entire plant from above. Most importantly, don't ignore a problem because you're hoping it will disappear. Tomato plants communicate through changes in their leaves, stems, flowers, and fruit. You don't need to panic every time you see an imperfect leaf. You simply need to pay attention, because that's really the lesson behind all 9 of these mistakes. I have also made a detailed video on what vegetables to grow in August. Watch this next.